Yosemite National Park is one of the oldest national parks in the country, spanning over 1,100 square miles, and established in 1890, has seen its fair share of all sorts of phenomenon, from missing persons to more supernatural occurrences. In tonight's episode, I'm going to be revealing to you 3 terrifying stories that reveal the horror that Yosemite hides. My girlfriend and I were camping back in Yosemite National Park, right around the Porcupine Trail creekhead. This was back in 2013. We had been there for a couple of days at this point, and were just getting ready to settle down for the night. We had set up our tent, which we actually had moved a couple of campsites due to some upsetting neighbors, but that's a story I'll withhold for the time being. Anyway, we put all of our stuff up in this new camp spot, and we tried to settle down the best we could. Had a fire, roasted some s'mores, and enjoyed the newfound peace and quiet that this new camp spot offered us, unlike our last one. Can you tell I'm a little salty about it? Anyway, my girlfriend and I were now lying in our tents, as she was exhausted from a long day of hiking and adventuring. As was I, but I just could not get my brain to shut down. It's like my body felt hopped up on adrenaline. And no, not from hiking and adventuring, something else. Like something just wasn't right. Call it cliche or whatnot, but it's almost like my body was responding to my environment, if that makes any sense. At least it does in the context of what was about to happen. So I'm lying there, watching my beautiful girlfriend sleep and just thinking to myself how lucky I am, when I'm kind of halfway looking out the tent flap, which was open, exposing the bare sky and the beautiful stars that filled it. And that's when I heard this strange rattling noise, as if like somebody had taken a bag of bones and was carrying it. I know that's a very strange description, but that's the best I can describe. It was a sound I never heard before, and it was growing louder. I'm lying there trying to figure out what it was because it was so out of place, and all of a sudden, in my clear view, this huge black thing comes running through the trees and darts right in front of our campsite, stopping, almost as if frozen in place. I was astonished by what I was seeing. It was easily 8 feet tall with long arms that were almost dragging on the ground, but I could tell immediately, judging from its appearance and everything in my body, that what I was looking at, there's no way it was a human. It looked too grotesque and nasty, and the thing then just suddenly burst out of nowhere and began looking around, sniffing wildly as if it had caught a scent of something that it really liked. It looked over to the right and looked over to its left, and finally, immediately, it stiffened its gaze directly at our tent, as if it had caught scent of whatever it was that it liked coming from us. It did that, and stayed still for about a second, and just as quickly as this thing burst out of nowhere and began looking around, it had disappeared that quickly, bursting off into the dense foliage around our campsite. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I lay there frozen in fear for a few moments, and then somehow my girlfriend began to stir. I say somehow because it was like her instincts had jolted her awake, or at least was telling her to wake up. It was like her senses were crawling inside to wake her up, and immediately, she could see how pale and scared I was. She began asking me if everything was okay. I told her no. I did my best to try and hide what I saw because I was still in shock and puzzled myself. But she grew worried. I told her that what I had saw was a large grizzly bear. Only problem is, Yosemite doesn't have grizzly bears. She did not know this at the time. I did though, and she's terrified of bears and began freaking out. We didn't sleep at all that night because we were both afraid. For her, she was afraid of a bear, but I was afraid of what visited us during the night. Afraid it would come back. Like I said, I never told her what exactly I saw, and it's probably for the better. We debated, lying there, whether we should just pack up now and call our trip good. We did get a few good days out of it anyway, but we decided to wait until daylight where we knew we'd be safe, at least having the sun on our side. In my head, I know what I saw was no flipping bear. I've seen bears in the wild before. In fact, I've spent a lot of time in the outside of the South. I've seen many black bear. No grizzlies though. And I could tell you, this was not a bear in any shape, way, or form. Clearly, it was something else. Something more human, but not. Something very strange and unusual. Story 2. I've been an avid backpacker and hiker for as long as I can remember. Ever since I was a little guy, really. But I'll spare you the background details. They aren't necessarily relevant. My story or experience takes place in Yosemite back in 2018. And to this day, I have no way to explain it in any rational sense. Anyway, here it goes. Me and a friend of mine were hiking up the Yosemite Falls Trail. We were pretty deep into the hike, and it was getting later. I remember we were both pretty tired and hungry at this point, having run out of rations. It was later on in the evening, and we had reached a fork in the trail that split off to either go back down to Yosemite Village or continue up towards Nevada Falls and Half Dome. My friend wanted to continue onwards towards Half Dome, so I obliged him by agreeing with his decision, although I had no desire to climb more. As soon as this decision was made, he turned around abruptly and looked behind us as if something had startled him. Something did startle him, but it wasn't behind us. It was directly above us. A rock had come crashing down right where we just stood. You could have heard a pin drop after that happened. Everything went quiet for about 2 seconds until my friend screamed. Naturally, I looked up out of reaction as to why a large boulder just fell, and over the cliff face was this strange, hairy face that I could not put a finger on. It was like a person, but in a gorilla suit, or half human, half ape, if that makes any sense at all. Because trust me, I get the description sounds strange, but it's what I saw. And instantly, instead of being filled with wonder and mystery, trying to grasp the entire situation before us, I was filled with dread, fear, and a foreboding sense of I needed to leave now. And naturally, I feel my body take off after my friend without even thinking to run. After catching up with him and catching our breath, we both tried to rationalize and explain, did you just see that? Did you know what happened? And we sounded like stumbling idiots, honestly, fumbling our words and screaming at each other. But after a couple of minutes, we were able to catch our breath and reassess the situation. Of course, the way I explain this through writing makes it sound like we were calm and collective. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case. We were very much terrified of what we had just experienced. And we knew there was only one way out. We had to get off the trail. So, as we made our way down the trail, heading out, things began to get strange around us. I will also state this again that I personally found it very strange there was barely anybody else on the trail with us, because the Yosemite Falls Trail Loop is very, very busy. In fact, it is one of the busiest trails of the entire park, and so for it to have barely anybody around was strange to begin with. But then, these strange noises, or should I say lack of noises, accompanying us on the way down were equally unsettling. At one point or another, we both could have sworn, my friend and I, whispers or whistling coming off in the foliage near us, almost as if trying to lure us off trail and get our attention. We paid no mind. We continued down until we got to the base of the loop, and that was it. I understand that my story is very anticlimactic, but it is what it is. It's really just one of those experiences we try not to ever talk about because it was so terrifying. Anyway, that's my experience. Take it or leave it. Story 3. My grandfather used to work as a ranger in the Yosemite National Park back in the 1960s. He has some pretty harrowing stories to share with me, and has shared crazy things going back from when he first started to when he had retired. Everything dealing with coyotes to strange people entering the park and all the above. And several of them have really spooked me, but there was one that really stuck out to me that I've always wanted to share. Unfortunately, most people are not necessarily receptive to this information because it's kind of on the paranormal side, which most people are so quick to brush off. It's the time he dealt with a strange bipedal canine creature within the Hetchy Reservoir. One night, he was on patrol, and he says that it was right around 10:30 to 11 p.m. He had heard a strange howling coming from within the forest. He thought nothing of it because there are mountain lions and coyotes and things like that, and it kind of just blended in with the noises of the night, he had told me. And at the time, he explained the noises, or the howling, was more just kind of like background noise to him. It didn't really catch his attention, but he was aware of its presence and aware that the noises were there. But then soon enough, he had heard this eruption of howls and yipping, and it sounded like a pack of coyotes, but it sounded wrong, like they were being attacked or they were screaming and squealing in pain, as he described. This disturbed him greatly, just because he's used to hearing coyotes and has heard many of them his entire life, since he's kind of always grown up as an outdoor kid. His grandpa before him used to hunt and take him out, and so he's a very well-versed man in the outdoors, and it's pretty much all he knew, which is part of the reason why he went on to become a ranger. But I digress. So he's in the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, and he goes out to investigate after the noises had stopped, and he's only maybe about 400 feet away from his vehicle, where he finds where the coyotes were. And he explained to me, as he reiterated the story multiple times, that when he originally first heard the coyotes, he explained that they were very close by, and 400 feet isn't exactly that far away. But what he found was about 4 coyotes that looked to be shredded to pieces, as if they had been shoved through a meat grinder or a wood chipper. And the smell of blood and the kill itself was very, very fresh. Now, this frightened my grandfather because bears can and will kill coyotes, but this is different. Yes, bears can get in a dispute with coyotes and kill and eat them over a carcass, but there was no carcass to fight over. In fact, it just looked like a kill scene. Along with the odor of fresh death and new blood was this really stinky, musty dog smell. My grandfather explained it like a wet dog in the most pungent sense, and it was all around. You couldn't escape the smell. And when he tries to investigate what's around him, he notices incredibly large canine prints indented in the ground. Automatically, his brain is firing off warning signs because there are no wolves in Yosemite National Park. There are only coyotes and bears and other various wildlife. And so for a large canine to be in the confines of the Yosemite National Park, well, it should not exist. And this greatly worried my grandfather. But the more he studied and looked at these prints, trying to gauge what animal it could have possibly been from and looking for some rational explanation as to these 4 ripped apart coyotes, the wet dog smell, and now these strange canine prints, he makes another terrifying discovery. These prints do not move like a quadruped or like any normal animal on 4 legs. Instead, these tracks were bipedal, meaning on 2 legs, like you and I, or like an ape walks. And the other problem that goes along with finding these bipedal tracks is the stride and gait, which were easily 4 feet, which means that whatever made these prints had to have been of considerable size. We're talking easily 7-8 feet tall, if not larger, and weighing a considerable amount considering the indentation in the dirt itself. This was enough to greatly worry my grandfather, and as he makes this discovery and is putting these puzzle pieces together in his head, he begins to hear rustling over the trees, probably no more than 30 feet away. And right through, moving through the brush, he sees, to his nightmare, what he would describe as a wolf man, believe it or not. At the time that he had this experience, there wasn't pop culture werewolf movies. I mean, sure, you had the Wolfman, but I don't exactly know from my grandfather if that had come out yet, but I don't think he was aware of any sort of half-human, half-wolf concept or hybrid yet in his time or pop culture. And so he sees this thing moving through the brush toward him right near the open tree line. My grandfather had no other choice but to quickly move out of there while keeping his eyes on the open tree line, watching this thing clearly walking on 2 legs right up to the tree line, watching my grandfather intently, the way a predator watches its prey move, calculating every second and every move as if trying to be 2 steps ahead. He described to me that its face and eyes were as devious as they were dangerous, and that whatever this wolf thing was looked like a natural-born killer. Multiple times I tried to pick his brain and ask him could he give me more of a description of what it looked like, but he refused. In fact, every time I brought it up, he kind of shuddered and acted terrified to even talk about it. Clearly, knowing my grandfather, whatever he saw really scared him. And in fact, from what I've heard from him, he didn't tell anybody else about it. Family, friends. Really, it wasn't until much later in life that he actually started to tell only those of his close friends this story, including me, his grandson. But this was something you couldn't openly talk about, especially during that time. You had been locked and sent to the loony bin. He tells me, though, that as this thing was watching him climb up the embankment up to his vehicle, this thing looked incredibly angry. Angry that it had discovered its kill and then it discovered him, assuming that whatever he was looking at was a him due to the sheer bone and muscle mass. Once my grandfather made it up the embankment and to his vehicle, he turned his back to it, got in his vehicle, and drove away. And that was the last time he ever physically saw a creature resembling what he did. Now, there was several other occasions after this, during the rest of his tenure as a ranger, where he found strange killings that he could only, in the back of his head, admit to himself that this creature that he had seen in his past was a potential suspect for this new series of killings. There were multiple times where he told me he would find full-grown deer, just regular doe, torn to shreds in pieces. And not like coyotes do when they kill and eat, or a bear do. I mean, it looked as if something had taken this doe and put it through a meat grinder. I mean, shredded to bits. We're talking ripped to pieces. My grandfather emphasized that point over and over again to me to really ring home that this wasn't a regular, ordinary kill, because they would find wildlife kills all the time. In fact, seeing coyote kills and bear kills was pretty commonplace on the job the longer you worked there. You would just see it and you would learn to recognize a mountain lion killed this, a pack of coyotes killed and scavenged on this, a black bear killed this, and you would learn behavioral patterns of these animals. But the kills he was finding, it didn't match any description. And it really bothered him because he knew deep down what it was, but would refuse to talk about it or really acknowledge that it was even there, because it's like his brain could not handle the fact that it existed. He had found multiple dead animals in this fashion, not just doe, but coyotes and even a mountain lion at one point is what he told me. That it had appeared from what he had seen that one of these creatures had actually crawled and made its way inside a mountain lion's den and decapitated this mountain lion. And I try and sit here and just pair all these stories that my grandfather has shared with me about stories about cryptid sightings in national parks and how the Dogman phenomenon is exploding, and I can't help but wonder that Yosemite is truly hiding the existence of these canine creatures, what many of us know as Dogmen. And that's only speculation, because there might be more. There might be more varieties, there might be more cryptid species, but whatever is the case. But whatever might be the case in Yosemite, there is something there that is the top of the food chain. And it's definitely not us. It's not bears, it's not coyotes, and it's certainly not anything we can know. If you guys enjoyed tonight's stories, be sure to hit that like button, leave a comment down below, and subscribe for more great stories like this.